Good day, Kabibal, and welcome to our high school education webinar series. For the discussion today, the topic will be on extending classroom management online. Before we begin, take note of the following reminders. Make sure you are registered to the webinar to have your e-certificate of participation. Visit certificate.vibalgroup.com to generate your proof of attendance. Place your questions on the comment box allotted during the session and they will be addressed by our speaker later on. Share the video using hashtag LearnAs1PH as our official hashtag to our Vival webinars. Experience learning, Kavibal. And now, to proceed with our webinar this afternoon, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our distinguished speaker today. Mr. Joram Kim Corcuera is a graduate of Bachelor in Secondary Education, major in English at the Philippine Normal University in 2011. He obtained his Master of Arts, major in Communication degree at the Ateneo de Manila University. He has been a teacher for almost a decade and has already taught English, literature, public speaking, and research classes. He also represented the Philippines in various international research conferences about education and communication. He has been delivering CPD training sessions and teacher seminars across the country for more than 3 years. He is also into journalism as he has already experienced handling a number of student publications in various schools and universities including San Beda University and University of Santo Tomas. At present, he is working as a faculty member at the University of Santo Tomas Junior High School, where he teaches communication arts and journalism courses. Let's welcome Mr. Joram Kim Corcuera.
Alright, so good afternoon po sa lahat ng ating viewers. Okay, so as we open the new academic year, definitely there will be a lot of challenges that will come our way. Especially, of course, right now that most of us will be implementing full online education for the first time. With this, without a doubt, we educators would have to do a lot of adjustments in order for us to become the most effective teachers in the eyes of our students. So to those who are watching right now, I hope you will be able to gain new insights. I hope you will be able to gain new knowledge that you can use, of course, to manage our virtual classrooms effectively. But before anything else, let me thank Vival Group for this invitation, of course, to be the resource speaker of our webinar today. I am indeed honored to share my knowledge, to share my experience, of course, in teaching in the virtual space. Again, welcome to our webinar today entitled Managing Virtual Classrooms Effectively. So on that note, let me share with you the PowerPoint presentation that I prepared for our webinar. Okay. So just like how I started my other webinars or the teacher trainings, the CPD trainings that I conducted before the COVID-19 pandemic, I always start with a quote. And today's quote po, of course, I like to connect this quotation to the very reason why are we here. Diba? I'd like to ask you, okay? Ngayon po, bakit po tayo naka-tune in sa live sa YouTube live na ito? Why are you here? Diba? Some of us of course would be saying, ah, andito kami kasi gusto namin matuto. Definitely, yun talaga ang rason natin lahat. Some of us baka sabihin, andito kami for the certificates, but I think the certificates would always be a bonus. But that would never be the primary reason why we are here. We are here because we understand that the teaching and the learning process do not end. Di ba po? On that note, let me show to you our quote of the day. So by learning, you will teach, and by teaching, you will learn. Indeed, there are a lot of things that we need to understand with regards to remote and distance learning. Diba? Some of us would be implementing modular, some of us would be implementing online education. And since this would be the first time, definitely there are a lot of things that we need to learn. Diba? And the many changes in the field of education, dagdag pa natin of course the severe effects of the pandemic, are the primary reasons why there is a need for us, educators, to upgrade and level up our skills in helping our students become the best versions of ourselves. I mean, become the best versions of themselves. On that note, let me present po na yun talaga yung challenge natin, di ba? That's the challenge for us on how we would be able, of course, to address the 21st century needs of our students. We have to be reminded that right now it's already 2020. And since it's already 2020, people have changed. And of course, this includes the learners. As a matter of fact, in a research conducted by Hootsuite in January 2020, sabi dito, sa Digital Around the World in 2020 research, sabi dito, total population is 7.75 billion, unique mobile phone users 5.19 billion, internet users 4.54 billion, active social media users 3.80 billion. Pag tinignan po natin yung percentages, 55, 67, 59, 49. In other words, it's very easy to conclude that most of us, majority of us, of course, have been using technology, di ba? In different forms. And right now, of course, tataas pa yan because right now, this is the best tool that we can use, of course, to continue education. Di ba po? Para matuloy natin, of course, yung trabaho natin na naturuan at, of course, i-prepare ang kabataan para sa, of course, sa mga obligations waiting for them. Alright? So, now, this research, I'd like to capitalize the use of this research po sa gagawin nating webinar today. Remember, our topic talks about managing classrooms effectively in the virtual space. Okay, so if we talk about the virtual space, then definitely we're talking about technology. And since of course lahat naman tayo talagang nag-migrate na po or slowly migrating of course to virtual space, then definitely we would be encountering different ways also on how we would be able of course to implement classroom management. Ito po yung mga bagay na i-discuss natin today. Right? Always remember, my dear teachers, that since we're talking about technology, diba, in education, technology can be a life changer. Technology can be a game changer for kids who are both in school and out of school. So this is from Queen Reina of Jordan. So indeed, ito po yung kailangan natin embrace, diba? We need to embrace the different changes in the field of education. Of course, part of which would have to be, of course, diba, the use of technology. Sabi nga nila, the use of technology in the field of education has truly spread like a wildfire, even before the COVID-19 pandemic. Paano pa po ngayon? Diba? We cannot go out and meet with our students because it's too risky. It's too dangerous. That's why we're going to maximize the use of technology, of course, to continue making significant changes, diba? To continue, of course, our influence as modern heroes, diba? Life-changing, diba? Game-changing. So ito po yung magiging weapon natin. So with this, I'd like to address one major concern of our more tenured teachers. Pag sinabi natin more tenured teachers, ito yung mga teachers na talaga namang, ito po yung mga teachers na talaga namang matagal na pong nagtuturo, di ba? So, ayan. Alright, wait lang po I think we're having some technical difficulty. Ayan po. So, again, ito po yung mga, gaya po ng sinabi ko kanina, ito po yung mga teachers na matagal na po talaga nagtuturo. So, with that, I'd like to show po to you a picture. So, this picture, of course, contains the old way and, of course, the new way. So, pag tinignan po natin, old way, going backwards. New way, of course, moving forward. Ganito po dapat tayo, my dear teachers. Some of us will be saying, ayoko kasi gamitin yung technology. Bakit? Number one, andun yung takot natin na palitan tayo ng technology. Pero gaya ng sinabi ko kanina, it can be life-changing, it can be game-changing. But both ways. Game-changing in a positive way, and game-changing, of course, in a negative way. So if we would be using technology in the right way, then definitely, of course, we're moving forward. But if we would not be able, of course, to capitalize the potential, of course, diba, of this technology in the field of education, then we're moving backwards. We have to be reminded that the best teaching strategies that made the best teachers before would no longer be the best teaching strategies that would make them the most effective teachers nowadays. Why? Because there are a lot of changes in the field of education, diba? Ba ano-ano nga po yun? Of course, one would have to be, of course, the global and local change. So specifically, of course, one, there were a lot of changes in the field of education system. Di ba? Nagbago na yan. Ngayon, of course, definitely talaga nabago talaga. Second, of course, assessment. Actually, even before COVID, di ba? Dati nung nag-aaral ako, I can still remember my teachers would always motivate me to get good scores in the exams. Kasi pag na-perfect ko or mataas na nakuha ko sa periodical test, most likely I would be an honor student. But right now, as an educator, napansin ko, may mga estudyante na ang galing talaga sa periodical test. Pero unfortunately, sila yung medyo nahihirapan sa pag-apply ng skills. So dahil doon, of course, hindi sila yung nag-excel na number one sa klase. Why? Because even in how we assess our students, of course, nagbago din. And of course, definitely, kung nagbago din yun, of course, magbabago din po ang methodologies, strategies, curriculum, and many more. Di ba? So, for us to be more convinced na talagang marami talagang nagbago in the field of education, of course, makikita natin ito sa ating learners. Diba? Ang mga learners nowadays, they have innate skills in using technology. And they would be more engaged, they would be more interested, of course, if their teachers are integrating the use of technology with regards to their lessons. Kaya lang, ako may napansin ako personally. When I saw this quote online, sabi ko, I'd like to put this one in my presentation. Sabi dito, I've yet to have a student, okay, to tell me they cannot use technology in class because they haven't had professional development on it. Diba? So, pagtingnan po natin, my dear teachers, pag kinumpare po natin, tayong mga educators, we're attending a lot of trainings, we're attending a lot of webinars, we're attending a lot of sessions that would help us, of course, improve, enhance our knowledge in terms of technology integration. Pero wala halos tayong nakitang kabataan na magsasabi, ay, hindi ko alam kung paano gamitin yan. Kailangan ko umattend ng seminar. Diba? Why? Because just like what I mentioned to you earlier, these students have innate skills in terms of using technology. So if they have innate skills in terms of using technology, then we expect, of course, that they're more fluent, that they are better users of technology. On that note, I'd like to capitalize the concept of digital divide. Ito po yung rason bakit tayo kailangan natin nasa dabakbak na professional development. Because even if some teachers are digital natives, we're not part of the Generation Z. And itong Generation Z, sila talaga yung mga, kung may level of technology na pinanganak pa lang talagang equipped na, sila yon. Diba? Kaya ano ang of course message sa atin nun? That as educators, there are a lot of things that we need to do. We need to cope, diba? We need to be better than our students. Para at least, of course, ma-maximize talaga natin kung ano yung gamit nila. Remember, my dear teachers, sabi ko nga kanina, madaming nagbago. And one of the things that change, of course, would have to be the behavior of our learners. But for us to understand what are these changes, kilalanin muna natin. Who are our learners? Sino po ba sila? Okay? Our learners, of course, are members of the Generation Z. Okay? So they're also called as the I generation, the iGen, di ba? Ang birth years nito would have to be 1996 to present. Although some researchers claim hindi daw 1996, 1995 daw. So this generation, of course, is expected to become the fastest growing generation in both the workplace and the marketplace. And of course, they're also known as the generation that comes after the millennial generation. So lahat ng estudyante natin ngayon, of course, from elementary, high school, lalo na ngayon, of course, this is a high school webinar. So all our high school students, both from the junior high school and the senior high school, are members of the Generation Z. Okay? So if, of course, diba, pag tayo gumagawa, for example, ng isang project, diba, we will not make the projects only based from what we can do. But we will base it, diba, from what our audience want it to be, diba? How our audience want it to be, diba? For example, kunwari, if it's, for example, in business, diba, pag gagawa tayo ng sariling project, magbebenta tayo, ang tanong natin, ano bang bebenta? Ano bang papatok sa masa? Ano ba yung gusto ng customers, diba? So, ganun din po sa pagtuturo. That is the main reason why we have to understand the changes in our learners, di ba? Bakit po? Kasi syempre, sino ba ang matututo? Para kanino ba natin ginagawa yung lessons? Para sa mga bata. So if we wouldn't be able, of course, to note the many changes in the field of education, particularly the changes present, of course, among our learners, then we wouldn't be able, of course, to address their needs and their preferences. So on that note, of course, tayo as teachers, marami tayong kailangan baguhin. At dahil marami tayong kailangan baguhin, let me ask you, ano ba ang pinakamahalaga sa mga ipapakita ko ngayon, of course, for us to become the best teachers in the eyes of our students, okay? So we would determine this one, of course, through an alphabet game. Ayan. So in this alphabet game, I will be presenting 3 words, right? So skills, knowledge, and attitude, okay? So as I present these 3 words, aalamin natin, alin ba sa tatlong to yung pinakamahalaga na dapat meron tayo for us to be able to address the 21st century needs of the learners, specifically, of course, the Generation Z. Okay, so we would be determining this, the answer to this question through an alphabet game. So in this alphabet game, gagawin po natin bawat letter po may value. So for example, S, letter A is equal to 1, B is equal to 2, C is equal to 3, and then the like. So again po, 3 words: skills, knowledge, and attitude. So I'll give you 1 minute po. After a minute, let's try to compute alin ba sa tatlong to ang may pinakamataas na value. Because the word answer to this question will have to be, kumbaga, the most needed. Kumbaga talaga ito yung pinakakailangan natin, of course, in addressing the 21st century needs of our learners. Alright? So I'll give you po a minute again. Skills, knowledge, and attitude. Ayan. So right now, I think some of you will be saying, alam mo, para sa concern, mahalaga yung tatlong yan. Diba? Of course, definitely, I have to agree with you. But definitely, meron na isa na pinakamahalaga. Diba? Of course, in terms of being able to fulfill our mission to address the learner's preferences, of course, in the 21st century. Alright? So let's try po i-reveal na natin. Okay? So final tally. Alright? So skills, you would be having 82. Knowledge, you would be having 96. And attitude, you will be having 100. Now, what does it mean? Ano ba ang imply po nito? Okay? One, a lot of teachers, I'd like to believe, we're all skilled. Actually, I used this scheme, if I'm not mistaken, in a webinar did before, sa Vival din. Sabi ko, kaya feeling ko is a must that I would also put it here. Okay? Because we need to understand, ito talaga yung kailangan natin. So skills, I'd like to believe that all of us are skilled. Diba? Bago naman tayo naging teachers, 4 na taon tayong nag-aral ng college, o nag-internship pa tayo, of course, and then we undergo trainings, seminars, workshops. So definitely, I think it's safe to say that all of us are skilled. Knowledge. Ako po, I'd like to believe na kaya tayo may sariling subject matter is because we can call ourselves experts, di ba? Dun sa field po na yon. Saka meron tayong tinitik na licensure examination for teachers. And the fact that we're able, of course, to pass this licensure examinations, then it only means that, of course, we know what we're talking about. So we're knowledgeable. But of course, attitude, ito yung pinakamataas, 100. Why? Because there are a lot of teachers who are skilled, there are a lot of teachers who are knowledgeable, but unfortunately, they do not have the right attitude. That's why they cannot address all the needs and the preferences of our learners. Ano po bang attitude ang tinutukoy ko dito? Simple lang po. The attitude to embrace the many changes in the field of education. Because admitted or not, may their teachers, may their formators, may their educators, no matter how skilled we are, no matter how knowledgeable we are, if we won't be using, of course, diba, the things that the students actually prefer nowadays in their journey mga educational journey, then we wouldn't be able, of course, to help them become the best versions of themselves. Gaya ng sinabi ko po, marami po nagbago sa sistema ng education, di ba? Allow me to present to you, of course, this many changes para makita talaga natin bakit ba kailangan. Bakit ba natin kailangan i-embrace, of course, yung changes na sinasabi mo? Bakit mas mahalaga ang attitude, okay? Why? Because, of course, briefly lang po, briefly, I would, of course, summarize this one. In the 20th century classroom, it's a teacher-led instruction. Since it is a teacher-led instruction, the teacher is the one, of course, doing all the talk. It's a one-size-fits-most instruction. And learning, of course, happens within the confines of the four walls and the schedule. In other words po, kumbaga, the main source of information, if not the teacher, would be the textbook. Regardless if you are a slow learner, fast learner, average learner, si teacher, isang beses lang niya ituturo yan. Kung hindi ka makasabay, and then it's going to be your problem, di ba? Parang you need to exert more effort. If the board ka kasi nga, fast learner ka, then of course, unfortunately, in this setup, hindi na-address si teacher yung need mo. And more often than not, of course, the use of technology, hindi talaga prevalent pa noong 20th century. Unlike, of course, in a blended classroom or in the 21st century, of course, here you would be seeing that the use of technology very prevalent na siya. You would be seeing it, of course, one, of course, gamit ng mga estudyante, laptops, gamit ng estudyante, of course, interactive whiteboard, gamit ni teacher, of course, technology, and then the like. So, ganito po tayo. Di ba? The only difference is that, of course, we're not going to do it in a physical setup. We're going to do it in the virtual space. So, of course, since we're going to do it in the virtual space, then we have to understand that our classrooms would also have many teachers. Not literal na madami tayong teachers sa isang Zoom session o sa isang YouTube session o sa isang Facebook live session and the like. What I mean na marami pong teachers is that, one, of course, tayo, teachers. Second, of course, the videos that we're uploading, if we're implementing, for example, classroom blended learning, the pre-recorded lectures will also serve as teachers. Third, of course, the internet itself. Di ba? Kapag nag-search yung mga bata ng information online, these things will also serve as teachers. Fourth, their classmates, lalo na yung mga bata talaga nag-advanced reading, if they're, for example, doing an intellectual discourse, then the students themselves can serve as teachers and many more. Of course, in a blended learning setup, hindi natin nagiging problema yung differentiated instruction. Or in a 21st century classroom setup, hindi natin nagiging problema. In other words, yung pag-address ng slow learners, fast learners, and of course, average learners. Why? Because we can do differentiated instruction. We can give, for example, supplementary activities to do sa mga medyo sabihin nating slow learners para at least mas maintindihan nila. We can also give, for example, enrichment activities para sa fast learners. Of course, so kumbaga para ma-satisfy yung hunger and for learning. So in other words, ito po yung mga nagbago. And since nagbago po ito, of course, ito yung sinasabi ko kanina, why is attitude? Kumbaga, why is it important for us educators to have the right attitude? Kasi po maraming pagbabago. And since maraming pagbabago, bumigat yung trabaho natin. Actually, hindi lang yan eh. Hindi lang yan na nagbago. Di ba dati, ako nung nag-aaral ako, parang ang teachers natin, of course, goal is one, yung GMRC natin, kailangan yung character natin, syempre good moral and right conduct. Second, of course, yung academics. But right now, mas matindi po ang expectation sa atin. 21st century learners need not only become good individuals, know the right behaviors, academically proficient, hindi lang yun. Kailangan good innovators sila, self-directed learners sila, globally aware sila, effective communicators, collaborators, information and media literate, civically engaged, financially and economically literate, and many more. In other words, napakabigat po ng trabaho natin. That is why, of course, kung napakabigat ng trabaho natin, then dapat maging maayos yung sistema natin, of course, in terms of managing our classes. This is the very reason why Vival, of course, came up with this topic. Because we understand that in order for us to fulfill this very challenging mission, napakahalaga po ng classroom management. Diba? Mahalagang-mahalaga po ito. But with this, of course, bago ko i-discuss thoroughly kung ano yung classroom management in the virtual space, let us have first a very simple activity. So I'd like you to go to menti.com and use the code 781612. Again, I'd like you to go po to menti.com and use the code 781612. Pag pinuntahan po natin yan, makakita po tayo ng isang question. Nakalagay po doon, problems that arise in a virtual space. So tingin niyo po, di ba, most of us are implementing full-time, kumbaga full online education na first semester. So tingin nyo, ano yung mga problems na pwede nating ma-encounter? So ito po yung ilalagay natin, of course, dito ngayon. Ayan. So again, go to menti.com and use the code 781612. At ilalagay po natin mga sagot would have to be the problems that you think may arise inside the virtual space. Ayan. Sige po. Magbigay po tayo siguro ng 1 minute or 2 minutes, of course, for the teachers to be able to encode the problems that you think may arise in the virtual space, specifically, of course, concerns and in terms of managing, kumbaga, the virtual classrooms. Ano po matingin niyo yung mga possible na maging problema? So kahit po short phrases or words na po yung ilagay natin, and then magpa-pop out po siya dito pag naglagay na po tayo. Again, you need to go to www.menti.com and use the code 781612. Alright? Sige po, magbigay po ko ng mga 1 minute or 2 minutes po para po lumabas po dito kung ano po yung mga possible answers natin. Ayan, meron na naglalagay. Distractions, connection, okay? Netiquette, ayan po. Online distractions and then the like. Ayan. So, ayan. So, antayin pa po natin yung sagot ng iba pa nating teachers. Right now, 17 persons na po ang nagsasagot. So, this is also one of the applications that you can use, di ba? Mentimeter.com. Ayan po. Ayan. Siguro mag-antay lang po tayo kahit umabot ng 100 teachers yung nagsagot. So far, we already have 44 teachers. Ayan, 50 teachers na po. 58. Ayan. Ayan, so 180 na po. Ayan, lampas-lampas na tayo sa 100. Ayan. So, napansin niyo po, may mga words po na bigger, di ba? Pag bigger po yung words, ibig sabihin, mas marami po nagsasagot nun. So, baga, ibig sabihin, more than one teacher or more, kumbaga, mas malaki, mas maraming teachers pa yung nagsagot. Kapag mas maliit po yung words, ibig sabihin, mas onti po yung nagsagot nung, of course, nung sagot na yon. Kapag the smaller po yung words. So, the bigger, the many teachers answered it. Kumbaga, the smaller, the fewer teachers, of course, answered it. Ayan. So, 354 na po. Mabuti natin 400. Ayan po. Ayan. Siguro pwede na po. Ayan. Okay. Ayan. Marami pa rin po nagsasagot. Sige po. Nag-generate pa na nag-generate. Alright? So, habang inaantay po natin, of course, itong mga answers po natin, mga teachers, allow me po, of course, to thank again everyone sa lahat po na nanonood ngayon. While checking po the YouTube stream, meron na po tayong 7,299 viewers na nanonood. Ayan. So, definitely talagang we're preparing ourselves, of course, for the new normal, di ba? Some schools have already opened. Diba? Some schools will be opening next week. Ang public schools po, I think, third week, if I'm not mistaken, of August. So definitely, ngayong August talaga naharapin na natin, of course, yung challenges that will come our way, of course, in implementing full online. Right? So there you go. So 600 plus na po yung nagsasagot. But allow me, of course, so that we can proceed na po to other slides, allow me to read some of the bigger words, of course, and emphasize kung ang bakit tingin natin, yun yung sinagot natin. One, of course, pinakamalaki po dyan nakita natin is internet connection. Letter blue, color blue, internet connection. Indeed, this would be the very problem, di ba? In terms of how we would be able to manage our classes, di ba? One, of course, some students may use internet connection as their excuse for being late. Two, for not being able, of course, to attend synchronous classes, di ba? Pero ang totoo pala, for example, may internet naman pala sila. So, indeed, that would be one of the challenges. Second, distractions, di ba? This is one, of course, of the dilemma. Kumbaga, negative side ito ng education, ng online education. Why, of course, kung ang technology pwede natin gamitin for, of course, education, pwede rin siyang gamitin, of course, for leisure entertainment, di ba? Pwede yung mga bata, for example, habang nakakonect sa internet, mag-social media, mag-mobile games, and then the like. So definitely have to agree that another one, of course, is distraction. Third, nakita ko dyan, one of the bigger words, the bigger phrases, time management. This is one of the things that I would be discussing today. Indeed, time management would also be a big issue, di ba? Why? Because of course we cannot ask our students to stay in front of their monitors from 7 o'clock to 4 o'clock p.m. Diba? We cannot ask all of them to, kumbaga, mag-online kayo ng 7 o'clock hanggang alas 4 gaya ng ginagawa natin of course in the regular setup. Kasi syempre, yung eye strain and then yung health conditions din ng mga bata, yung gastos din of course. So talaga yung time management could be an issue both of course sa part natin as educators and both din sa part of course ng learners. Fourth, ano pa po nakita ko dyan na problem po, ayan, slow internet, slow connection, of course, fourth, miscommunication. Yes, miscommunication isa din sa i-discuss ko today. Of course, whenever we talk online, di ba yung non-verbal expressions, non-verbal cues, medyo hindi ganun ka, kumbaga, na nakikita, unlike, of course, a normal setup, which of course, could lead also to miscommunication. Baka mamaya hindi naintindihan ng mga bata online kung ano yung binibigay na instruction ni teachers kasi nga, of course, it's different when you do face-to-face communication. Last one, ano pa po bang nakita natin dito na error? Ayan, cyberbullying. Ako indeed. Cyberbullying, one, of course, sa part ng teachers. Di ba pag in-screenshot tayo or sabihin natin video tayo, pinost tayo online, of course, the cyberbullying. Second, of course, cyberbullying din sa part ng mga bata, di ba? The fact, for example, mamaya nag-Zoom session tayo, in-screenshot yung picture, pinost online. So definitely, of course, these are the very concerns na kailangan natin na maisip, of course, kumbaga, para magawan natin ng rules and regulations. Of course, if we talk about cyberbullying, one of the things that we have to understand, of course, yung halaga po ng Data Privacy Act, di ba? So, for example, pwede tayo gumawa ng rules sa classroom na bawal mag-screenshot, bawal mag-post na kung ano man nangyayari in a virtual classroom, and then the like. So, indeed, marami pa pong problema. So, ayan, nasa 914 na po ang nagsasagot nitong Mentimeter natin nito. Thank you po sa lahat na nagsagot. So, I appreciate the fact that, of course, dami natin nilalagay, ang daming kulay. So, definitely, madaming possible problems, of course, that we would be encountering in the virtual space. But right now, allow me po to go back to our slide and to continue, of course, our discussion. So, again, since we're talking about the first classroom management, bago ko sa ipakita yung differences sa virtual space and sa physical setup, let us try to define first, what is classroom management? So, classroom management is the process of creating and maintaining orderly classrooms. So the word is orderly classrooms. It is a set of teacher behaviors that create and maintain conditions in the classroom that permit instruction to take place efficiently and effectively. So sabi dito, creating and managing orderly classrooms, of course, which foster behaviors na talaga namang hindi nakakastorbo sa instruction. In other words, when we talk about classroom management, it is, of course, our own ways of ensuring that, of course, the instruction na ibibigay natin would be smooth, maiintindihan talaga ng mga bata. Of course, why? Because they would be, of course, behaving the right way. Diba? So, we'll talk about scope of classroom management. Saan po ba nag-o-occur ang classroom management? Okay? One, of course, crisis and non-crisis. So, in other words, in situations where there are problems, classroom management, of course, is a must. But, even if in situations na walang problema lumalabas, dapat po, andun pa din po yung classroom management. So we do not just implement rules and regulations when there are problems. Even before, kumbaga, not before, but even, of course, walang problema, definitely dapat itong classroom management is a must. Of course, kaya nga tayo nag-implement ng classroom management para hindi na tayo maka-experience ng crisis or problems, of course, inside the classrooms. This would be, of course, this would involve various academic activities, giving of instructions. Syempre, mamaya hindi malinaw yung instructions natin. Of course, it's poor classroom management pag hindi natin alam kung paano natin bibigay na malinaw yung instructions natin. Of course, classroom management would also be involving the rules and the consequences that, of course, we establish and that, of course, binibigay natin sa mga bata. Of course, we have to understand that the rules and the consequences would also play a role, kumbaga, in terms of how we would be eliciting response sa mga bata. For example, mamaya na-late sila, tapos pag na-late pala sila, hindi na tayo nagko-consider, for example, na-late sila, tapos kaya pala sila na-late kasi wala pala silang internet. So kung wala po silang internet, paano po yun? Diba? Are we saying na automatic minus 5 na agad sila, minus 10 agad sila? So definitely, of course, kailangan andun din, of course, yung pagiging considerate natin. So definitely, the students must understand, kumbaga, the very reason why these rules are existing. But at the same time, they must see where, of course, the administrators, the educators, their teachers are coming from. Next, of course, would have to be the behaviors. Behaviors would refer, of course, dun sa attitude ng mga bata in front, of course, ng mga teachers, and of course, during the time din na wala naman yung kanilang mga teachers kapag wala rin sila sa classroom. Discipline, planning, of course, syempre, mahalaga po yan in terms of classroom management. Remember, kumbaga, in lesson planning, a good lesson plan, of course, would result to most probably dun sa isang maayos na klase. Pero kung hindi maayos ang lesson plan mo, then definitely, most probably, ang mga estudyante mo talagang would not be behaving the best way. Of course, it would also be involving the students, of course, and the educators. Right? So in other words, pag sinabi natin classroom management, everything that we do in school, lahat ng ginagawa natin in school, lahat po yan, of course, sakop po yan ng classroom management. And when we talk about classroom management, meron tayong tinatawag na additional C's or concerns na pwede nating i-involve when it comes to classroom management. Okay? One, of course, is competition. Ako po, this is one of my secrets, one of my strategies in terms of managing my classrooms, managing my classes effectively. I always try to infuse kumbaga the element of competition, pero healthy competition. Minsan po kasi ang mga bata, let's say for example, pag may competition, mas talagang andun yung kumbaga yun yung triggering factor nila, yun motivating factor nila para at least to do better. So you can also of course have those things, competition. Pero healthy competition. Second, of course, connectedness. The students must understand, of course, why are you doing this? Bakit ba nilang ginagawa to? Diba? We must be, of course, explain those things to them. And of course, yung rapport natin as teachers sa mga bata, mahalaga din po yun. Of course, compassion. Diba? I'd like to believe that students, of course, have reasons din naman po with regards to their misbehaviors. Baka mamaya may family reasons na pala, may pinagdadaanan na pala sila. So, of course, yung compassion din natin, na itindihin din sila. Mahalaga din po yun, of course, in classroom management. And of course, mahalaga din po curiosity and of course, character. Diba? Sabi ko nga ang character, napakahalaga po. Diba? Character, of course, it is kumbaga, ang goal natin as teachers is not only for our students to become academically proficient, but also for our students to develop a strong character inculcated with positive morals and virtues. Gaya nga na sinabi ni Christopher Taubang, sabi niya, without classroom management, teaching is practically impossible. So, yan po ang very reason why we're having this webinar. Diba? Because if we would not know how to manage our classes effectively in the virtual space, then lalo po natin hindi magagawa yung obligasyon natin as teachers. Kumbaga, nag-adjust na tayo in terms of how we will be able to present our lessons, but we also have to understand that the adjustment also would have to be done in terms of how we would be able to manage our classes in the virtual space. Di ba? Hindi ibig sabihin na didisiplinahin natin sila, papagawa natin ito. Di ba? I'm pretty sure maraming teachers ang naka-experience na pinagawa ito before. But definitely, of course, right now, this is a big no. Siguro wala naman nung papagawa na ito virtually, di ba? Na, sulat mo, tas picturean mo, na ginawa mo to, and then like, why? Because, of course, these are things that would have to be considered kumbaga, bawal na po ito, di ba? Corporal punishment na po yung mga yan. So, in other words, kung hindi na pwede yung mga doon, then the question is, how do we maintain order in the classroom? Okay? One, eliciting compliance from the students. Okay? Second, eliciting respect from the students. Third, eliciting subordination from the students. Ito pong tatlo, I'd like to connect it as I try to explain po kung paano natin gagawin ito. Ako po, I always like to believe that, that if the students would be involved, diba, in making, for example, certain policies, then they would know, kumbaga, ito pala yung kahalagahan nito. And if they would understand the significance of these rules and regulations, then of course, we expect them to be more compliant. Diba? We expect them, of course, to be more participative. We expect them, of course, na talagang mas ganado sila na sumunod. Why? Because they would understand, of course, the very reason why these things are existing. So, ganun din po, my dear teachers. So, if we want, of course, diba, yung salitang respect, if we want, of course, to gain the respect of our students, then we have to respect them too. Okay? As we establish, of course, the different rules and regulations, policies natin sa klase. So in other words po, as we try to create our own rules and regulations, dapat po our students would be involved. The parents would be involved para mas maintindihan po nila, of course, why these things are happening, why these things are actually existing. And of course, we talk about maintaining order in the classroom, napakalaga po na hindi na po tayo magpa-punishment. Okay? And if we're not after punishment, then of course, we will be going after the PDET or tinatawag nating positive discipline in everyday teaching. So we'll talk about PDET. What is PDET? It is an approach based on sound pedagogical principles and practice that helps children succeed, gives them information they need to learn, and support their development, protection from violence, and active participation in their learning. So this is something that all teachers want, di ba? We want, of course, our students to develop the importance of kumbaga talagang knowing yung kahalagahan po of course ng talagang I mean yung learning environment po. 'Di ba? When I talk about PDET for example, ayan, for a while. Ayan, so ayan po. Narinig niyo po ba ako? Sorry, I'm having I think some technical difficulty po when it comes to the audio. Ayan, so I think okay na po. So going back, so PDET of course, gaya po ng sinabi ko, as teachers we have to understand that it is very important of course for us to be able to provide a healthy learning environment for our students. 'Di ba? Ang mga estudyante, definitely they would not want to be part of an institution promoting violence. Diba? Instead, they would be happy to be part of an institution that they would know that they would be that would protect them of course from different forms of violence, different forms of harm, and then the like. So that's the very reason why of course we have to maximize this specific concept. Dapat po proactive, dapat po positive discipline tayo, hindi tayo mag-rely of course in terms of giving punishment sa pagdidisiplina of course ng mga bata even in the virtual space. So furthermore, when we talk about PDET, it plays a key role in creating safer schools, for it does not only support children's full development, but it also improves the school environment by eliminating fear. Mahalaga po yan eliminating fear, teaching children self-discipline, and encouraging greater pleasure and engagement in learning. So in other words, if we're implementing PDET, then one thing that we must do, we need to reject the use of violence as a teaching tool. Tatanggalin po natin yan. In all forms, reject the use of violence as a teaching tool. Second, we need, of course, to focus on guiding our children's behavior. So pag sinabi natin behavior, hindi lang po yan yung behavior nila pinapakita nila pag nakaharap tayo. Of course, mahalaga when we are not around. So we need to understand that teachers play the role of a mentor, and of course, as mentors, we guide them in enforcing good behavior. And of course, itong mga bagay na to, again, let me just reiterate, hindi po natin ito magagawa through fear. Di ba maraming teachers na nagkiklaim, ay, alam mo, magaling ako sa classroom management. Why? Kasi pag klase ko wala nagsasalita. Pero ako po, to be honest, I never believe that a good class is a class na talagang wala nagsasalita. Why? Pag wala po kasi nagsalita, tahimik, ibig sabihin nun, either takot ang mga bata or wala silang naiintindihan. Of course, we welcome academic noise, di ba? Mahalaga po yun, even in the virtual space. We have to welcome academic noise. Dapat maintindihan ng mga teachers na ang pagdidisiplina in the 21st century is not a matter of making the students na takot sa'yo. Hindi dapat ganon. It's a matter of teaching the students how to respect you. Yun yung kailangan natin, respect and not fear. Remember, my dear teachers, that kumbaga itong school na to, it's a long-term investment in a child's development. So, on that note, talagang napakahalaga po yung role natin as mentors. Okay? So, of course, how would we start this? Paano ba natin magagawa yung effective na PDET? Paano ba natin magagawa yung effective, positive way, of course, of disciplining them? One, of course, pinakamahalaga, we have to start, of course, with the rapport. Okay? So, maintaining a good rapport, of course, with the students is essential to the emotional, psychological, and academic development and growth of the learners. Ako po, to be honest, feeling ko ito yung magiging challenging sa atin. Ako, to be honest, minsan tinatanong ko, ano kayang gagawin ko sa first day of class, no? Parang, how would I interact with my students? Kailangan gumaang yung loob nila sa akin at kailangan gumaang din yung loob ko sa kanila. But how would I do it, of course, in an online setup? Diba? It's different, of course. Kailangan kilala ko sila. Kasi para, diba, mas mahirap makipag-usap sa stranger, hindi ka komportable. Diba? Dapat mawala, of course, yung wall na maramdaman nila na kumbaga, it's a place na welcome talaga sila. Na talagang, I'm your teacher, so I'm here to help them. And I'm not here to make their life, kumbaga, tragic. Diba po? So, yun talagang mahirap po. So, the question is, how? Paano po ba natin, of course, ma-maintain yung good rapport natin sa mga estudyante? One, we advocate their needs. Alam niyo po, ito yung like kong sinasabi. Meron po tayong pangangailangan as teachers, indeed. pero meron din po pangangailangan ng mga estudyante natin. And sometimes, the students' needs are different from what we need. So of course, ano pong i-address natin? We try our best, of course, to address both things. But we have to understand that advocating students' needs would make them feel na significant sila. It would make them feel na, si teacher talaga is doing his part para talaga matuto ako. Okay? Second, real teachers for all students. Di ba po, now that we're doing online learning, isa sa mga tinatanong, paano kaya yung recitation? Di ba? So minsan, baka may isipin natin, ay, ito honor student, ito na lang yung lagi kong tatawagin. Di ba? Ay, mahihiya po sila. Dapat in the 21st century setup, lalo na sa virtual space, if the students would not understand the lesson, they would know how to message their teachers, telling the teachers, ma'am, sir, parang medyo nahihirapan po ako dito. And of course, magagawa lang nila yan if the students would feel that you are a teacher not only for specific students, but if you are a teacher for all students. In other words, no favoritism. Diba? Although ako po, naniniwala ako, to be honest, some of you might disagree with me, pero ako, I always say, favoritism exists. Imposible walang favoritism. Kaya lang, as teachers, of course, we have to hide this. Kumbaga, andun yung preferences natin. Pero dapat hindi ito maramdaman ng mga estudyante natin. Okay? Of course, we need to provide and help them in making certain decisions. Kaya talagang, it's another challenge for us eh. Kasi, sabi ko nga, di ba, parang as teachers, ang trabaho natin hindi na natatapos sa pagtuturo sa kanila ng academic skills, but also, of course, in molding them to become better individuals. Okay? So, and in order for us to fully guide them, of course, we give them, of course, tips, diba, guidance sa paggawa ng certain decisions. Pero po, warning lang po, my dear teachers, warning, in terms of giving advices, hindi po tayo experts dyan, di ba? Sino po ang experts dyan? Of course, it would be the guidance counselors. Kaya po ako, whenever there are specific events po na medyo sensitive na talaga, I always try my best not to give my specific advice. Baka kasi mamaya yung advice ko po ay mali. Di ba? So we refer them of course to the guidance counselors. Tandaan natin, my dear teachers, nung college po tayo, nag-aral po tayo, majorship natin, of course, English, Science, TLE, Filipino. Pero yung in terms of course, how to give advice, how to, of course, kumbaga, in terms of making decisions, kapag kailangan po natin ng tulong, of course, the guidance office, the guidance counselors po would have to be there at all times, supporting us. Kasi talaga ito yung forte po nila. Of course, next, the students must feel that we're protecting them from harm. Okay? Para maramdaman talaga nila na, ay, alam mo, si teacher dapat respeto ko yan. Kasi love na ako. So, dapat love ko din siya. Of course, enabling students to grow academically, hindi yung teachers na parang masaya tayo pag bumabaksak yung estudyante natin. Na parang, lahat kayo baksak, so matakot kayo, kaya gawin nyo to. Hindi ganon. Diba? We eliminate fear. We make them feel, of course, na talaga we're supporting them. And if they're failing, of course, dapat maramdaman nila na we're doing our part, of course, to help them, of course, grow academically. Of course, we promote success and achievement, no matter how little the success are. For example, minsan naka-perfect score, talaga dapat we give commendations, we appreciate. For example, kunwari walang bumaksak sa exam, we have to, of course, banggitin na sa klase, congratulations, I'm very happy because in our exam yesterday, napansin ko ganito, and then the students would feel kumbaga honored and they would be more motivated kasi 'di ba it's the little things that count the most, 'di ba, yung achievements po, celebrating achievements, napakahalaga po din. Of course, we empower them, 'di ba, napakahalaga po din. Remember, in the 21st century set up that students are responsible for their own learning. So if they're responsible for their own learning, then empowerment of course plays a significant role. And lastly, of course, we must serve their academic interests. Ito yung sinasabi ko kanina, their interest, of course, would always be connected to their needs. Diba? For example, right now, of course, the use of technology, for example, okay? We must be able, of course, to utilize various applications because kumbaga, this is their language. Dito sila interesado. So, ito yung pangangailangan nila. If we would be doing this, then definitely, of course, we have to expect that, kumbaga, better response talaga, better outputs, diba? Ang mapoproduce, of course, ng mga estudyante natin. Now, specifically online, how do we foster positive behavior management? Diba kanina we're talking about PDET or positive discipline, but how do we do it online? Okay? So one, of course, you give the students choices and ownership of the class. Simple things can make a big difference in our classrooms as the students feel that we value their opinion and want them to be a part of it. Gaya ng sinasabi ko kanina, my dear teachers, they need to understand that they are part of the class. In other words, it's not a teacher-led instruction na si teacher lang lahat gagawa ng decisions. The student must feel that they are part of the class and that we make decisions also for our class because they are part of it. Okay? Second, we have to clearly state the goals and objectives of the lesson. Di ba po? Para mas naiintindihan ng mga students yung ginagawa din nila, at the start of the lesson, we present what are our learning objectives today. Di ba? Because by explicitly stating the learning objectives and goals of the lesson, the students can map out in their mind what they need to accomplish during the class time. Provided din sila. For example, nilagay mo doon, at the end of the lesson, the student must know how to use capital letters and small letters. So, habang nagtuturo si teacher, napapaisip yung bata, teka lang, na-achieve ko ba yung goal ko? Ang goal ko, dapat alam ko na kung capital to o small to. If not, then what should I do? Diba? So, of course, that's another way, of course, of fostering positive behavior. Third, be positive and encouraging, even in correction. Alam niyo po, my dear teachers, our words are very important. Minsan yung salita natin, for example, that's wrong. Minsan it hurts, diba, the emotions of the student. Pero instead of saying, for example, what's wrong, pwede mo sabihin, you know what, you have a point, but unfortunately, I'm looking for a better answer. Diba? So these things matter as well. Diba? For example, you know what, I have to agree with you, okay? You're coming from a different point, but I think that's also valid. But right now, I'm looking for something. I'm looking for something na ganito, ganyan, and then the like. Of course, so don't just blast them down by saying that they're wrong. Okay, since the ultimate goal, of course, is to encourage them to keep trying. Remember, it's not a matter of asking them kung ano tama at mali, but it's a matter of making them, kumbaga parang feel na, ay, dapat mag-recite pa ako. Kung mali ako, dapat I should do better. Hindi ko mali ako, napahiya ako. Of course, pag napahiya ang bata, what would be the expected result? Hindi na yan magpa-participate. Okay? Next, of course, define your behavioral expectations. If you're not mistaken, ito naman ang gagawin ng most schools. Of course, lalo na sa first week siguro or even the second week of classes. Okay? All students must know the rules in the regular classroom. So in other words, pag nag-present po ang administrators ng mga rules and regulations, syempre minsan ng mga teachers may kanya-kanya pa tayong additional rules and regulations. And we have to ensure that all the students understand all these rules. Okay? Why? Because sometimes our rules would be different from other teachers, di ba? So dapat alam nila, para at least alam din nila kung paano sila mag-behave sa klase mo. Okay? Next, of course, use rewards and praises. Some online schools have reward systems built in their courseware. So tie these incentives to see if they motivate your students. For example, Kahoot. If you're not, siguro most of us are already familiar with regards to Kahoot. Di ba ang Kahoot po, every after round, pinopost kung sino mas mataas sa round 1, round 2, tapos sa dulo po para may trophy, recognition, and then like, napakahalaga po nito. Ito yung sinasabi ko kanina, competition. Okay? Mahalaga po ito. If the students would feel that they're rewarded and that their efforts are appreciated, then of course, we have to expect that they would be, kumbaga, doing better and that they would do their best to even improve, of course, and enhance their skills na para mas makapag-comply pa sa binibigay ng teachers. But of course, they would only be able to do these things kung talaga namang alam nila yung salitang disiplina. So, discipline. What is classroom discipline? Ano nga po ba ang classroom discipline? Okay? Classroom discipline, of course, enforces the expectations set by classroom management principles. Kagaya po sinabi ko kanina, that teachers must give the expectations. Diba? Kami, for example po, right now I'm handling one of the publications po in UST. So, dun sa isa sa activities namin, talagang napakahalaga na ilalagay namin, ano ba yung expectations namin? Diba? Para at least alam natin, ano ba yung dapat natin gawin, of course, in order to reach these expectations. Ganun din sa klase. Ano po ba yung expectation natin sa klase? Para at least alam din ng mga bata, alin ba yung tama, alin ba yung mali, para ma-achieve yung specific expectations. Okay? Now, ito about classroom discipline, it requires teachers to use fairness, consistency, flexibility, logical consequences, assertiveness, motivation, firmness, and modification. Okay? And of course, it has to be executed according to a hierarchy of consequences or a sequential order of rules. Ito yung sinasabi ko kanina, in developing specific policies, dapat talaga alam ng bata na talagang patas din yun. Diba? Kunwari, for example, meron tayong rules when it comes to taking online examinations. Bakit, for example, si student A, binayagan natin mag-take ng another special exam. Yun pala, nakalagay pala doon, of course, na kapag nakapagpasa ng excuse letter at valid yung reason, the student would be allowed, of course, to take another exam. Kasi, kunwari, kung nag-e-exam siya, nag-crash yung internet niya. So with that, of course, alangan naman pilitin natin i-record yung baksak na exam dahil hindi naman dahil sa ginusto ng bata bumagsak, kundi dahil sa nag-crash yung internet. So in other words, dapat po malinaw na malinaw yung rules and yung consequences and yung rules and regulations, yung policies, of course, in order for us to be able to enforce classroom discipline. Okay? Again, let me just reiterate, sinabi kasi disiplina, a lot of teachers would think discipline would refer to punishment. Okay? Pero tandaan natin, my dear teachers, that in the 21st century, discipline is never the same with punishment. Okay? So discipline is about helping children to understand and moderate their own behavior. So we teach them what is right and we teach them what is wrong. So that they would not, of course, do the same things na mali pa din, na mali. And they would, of course, adjust to apply, of course, and make better decisions, allowing them, of course, to observe better discipline talaga. And on the other hand, when we talk about punishment, it is simply created to control the behavior. So again, linawin natin, discipline is not the same with punishment. So we discipline our students, but we do not punish them. Mahalaga po yun. Again po, let me reiterate, we have to discipline our students, but we do not need to punish them. Okay? When we talk about punishment, it is often physically, emotionally, or verbally violent and does not respect children's rights. The focus on punishing mistakes discourages learners and prevents children from learning to moderate their own behavior. So in other words po, pag sinabi po natin punishment, may emotional impact po yan sa bata. Sometimes if we punish our students, instead of the students knowing what to do the next time this happens, yung bata parang andun na yung takot nila. Pag nandun na yung takot nila, hindi na nila mapakita kung ano yung dapat nilang mapakita. So it hinders them from, of course, participating to the lessons, participating actively sa mga discussions, and then the like. So with that, these are things, of course, that we always need to avoid. Okay, punishment. Other disciplinary actions that we must avoid. One, of course, it is giving extra academic work to our students. For example, mamaya may maling nagawa yung bata, sabihin natin, gumawa ka ng another activity, lalo pag online, no? Lalo kang hindi umattend ng synchronous classes dahil dyan, gawin mo ito lahat. Teachers, we have to understand that this is still a form of punishment. Second, reducing grades. Okay? Not unless, of course, it is written in the rules and regulations. Baka mamaya, for example, paano kunwari, sir, for example, nag-synchronous class kami. Tapos yung bata, nag-drawing bigla sa screen. Tapos medyo bastos yung drawing. Siyempre, we have to deduct points. Yes, but we have to make it clear. Pero when you say reducing grades, baka mamaya hindi fair na biglang, oh, dahil dyan, automatic zero ka na dyan, kahit naman may valid reason yung bata. Of course, this is something, of course, that we have to understand. Okay? Third, yung writing as punishment, gaya ng pinakita ko kanina, this is something that you must avoid. Fourth, baka mamaya sa PE class, sabihin ng PE teacher, oh, mali yung push-up mo. Dahil mali yung push-up mo, mag-push up ka, doblehin mo yan. So this is, of course, still corporal punishment. So definitely something that we must avoid. Okay? Corporal punishment, appeasement or cajoling, harsh and humiliating reprimands. Ito po, minsan, of course, sabi nga nila, di ba, ang pinakamatalas na espada ay hindi yung espada, kundi yung mga salita natin. So, lalo na po tayo, we are educators, we are opinion leaders. So, what we say, the students talaga, tiniisip mabigat yun. So, pag sinabi natin, alam mo, hina mo talaga, no, para maintindihan eh. Ulit na ako. Siyempre, masakit sa bata yun. So, that's something that we must avoid. Threats and shouting. Okay? So, wala pa naman po akong nababalitaan na nanigaw sa online class. Pero baka mamaya, syempre yung challenges natin, di ba? Minsan nakaka-frustrate na parang ang hirap na ng internet connection, tapos ang gulo-gulo pa nila. Syempre minsan yung pasensya natin nasasagad. But again, we must understand that these are things that we must avoid. Nagging, forcing apologies, di ba? Sarcastic remarks, and of course, group punishment. So in other words, madaming kailangan iwasan. Specifically, of course, kailangan natin iwasan yung punishment. Because again, let me just reiterate, we need to discipline our students, but there is no need for us to punish them. Okay? Again, going back to positive discipline, remember po, we must focus on discipline, and we must never, focus to, of course, punishment. When I talk about positive discipline, it is non-violent. It is solution focused. So our goal is not to, kumbaga, is not to punish our students, but to teach them to avoid doing these things again. So we focus on the solution, okay? Respectful and based on child development principles. Okay? It provides children the knowledge and skills to control and take responsibility for their behavior. And lastly, of course, it emphasizes understanding and communication and views mistakes as an opportunity for children to learn how to do better next time. Di ba lagi naman nating motto yan, mistakes make us better individuals. So we teachers of course must understand that one. Okay? Teachers, we don't give solutions din po, tandaan natin yan ha. Huwag po natin ibigay agad-agad, ito yung gawin mo next time. No. We need to process them, di ba? Pwede kung nagagawa po natin yan face-to-face, magagawa din naman po natin yan online. We need to process them. And again po, let me just reiterate, kung talagang, for example, medyo mabigat po ito, huwag po natin sarilinin. We consult, of course, the guidance counselors to help us. We consult, of course, kumbaga yung, kung ano pa po yung best services sa school na pwede natin makatulong, of course, in helping our students understand, of course, kumbaga, and develop, of course, yung character inculcated talaga with positive morals and virtues. So when we talk about positive discipline, there are some principles that we must understand. Okay, one, of course, holistic. It applies not only to the students' behavior, but to all aspects of their learning and social interaction. Second, of course, is strengths based. It identifies and builds on the student's strengths and not on the weaknesses. Okay? So in other words, i-maximize natin, purihin talaga natin, ay alam mo, magaling ka sa ganito, ganyan. I-maximize natin, no? Huwag natin hanapin lagi kung ano yung kulang. But of course, we always have to make them understand, of course, na kailangan din nila ma-develop yung other areas or yung weaknesses po nila. Third, of course, it must be constructive at all times. It is aimed at strengthening students' self-esteem and confidence. Mahalagang mahalaga po, especially in the online setup, that the students would feel they need to learn how to be confident. Hindi yung tipong tayong teachers yung sisira ng confidence nila. Diba? We have to understand na pagdating po ng pasukan, even if they have any skills in terms of using technology, yung iba dyan, nandyan pa talaga yung hesitant pa sila sa paggamit nun because they're not used to it. And we have to make them confident in using it. Hindi yung tipong we actually discourage them. Okay? Fourth, of course, inclusive. It recognizes and respects the diversity of our students. Alam naman po natin, of course, hindi lang yung slow learners, fast learners, average learners, meron din tayo multiple intelligences, and then the like, the diverse needs of our students. Proactive because it identifies the rules and behavioral and learning difficulties and implement strategies to promote success and avoid conflict. And lastly, of course, it must be participatory, okay? Because, of course, it engages students in the learning process and in the school community. So these are some of the principles of positive discipline. Diba? I'm pretty sure may kanya-kanya po tayong strategies on how we would be able, of course, to use these things. But then again, ika-capitalize lang po natin. If we want, of course, to implement positive discipline, then we encourage them. And we never, of course, promote any form of punishment or embarrassment and then the like. Di ba po? Ngayon, tayo lahat, my dear teachers, gaya ng sinabi ko, bukod sa pag-promote ng positive discipline in a virtual space, ito ang magiging classroom natin, di ba? We would be facing our screens, we would be facing, of course, our seeing our students in the virtual space. On that note, let me share with you some of the similarities and differences po ng face-to-face and online learning. Diba? In face-to-face po, when we talk about course planning, okay, instructors may choose to only attend to the big picture of the course and develop details as the class goes on. In online learning, syempre kailangan familiar na tayo before the class, during the class, and after the class. I think this is the best reason why ang DepEd gusto nila, for example, before the start of the academic year, lahat ng materials for the first quarter ay prepared na. Why? Kasi nga po, in online learning, it is a must for instructors to be familiarized with the course. Kasi nga, di ba, pag face-to-face, pwede po unti. Pag online, hindi naman online lagi yung mga bata. Minsan lang pag modular, kailangan mabigay na natin lahat because the students cannot afford to go online from time to time. Information presentation. Face-to-face, pwede verbal and sequential, di ba? Ano yung una nating lesson, ano yung pangalawa nating lesson, and then the live. In online learning, of course, kadalasan, we put everything online. Di ba po? Nilalagay natin sa LMS. Lalo na yung concept ng asynchronous learning. And why do we need to promote asynchronous learning? Because we have to understand that not all students can go online for a specific time. May mga, di ba, ito din po yung dahilan why others are proposing academic freeze. Di Kasi nga po, of course, hindi talaga lahat ng bata kaya talaga mag-online. Kaya po napakahalaga, of course, pagdating ng information presentation online learning, lahat po ilalagay na natin online. So, present po natin yun isang beses, and then of course, that's the time the students access this thing in their most convenient time. So, but of course, other schools, gaya kami sa UST, of course, meron pa rin kami synchronous classes. But of course, we also have materials for the students who cannot go online on a specific period. Okay? Class interaction. In face-to-face, of course, interactions are direct, synchronous, verbal, and typically one-to-many. In online learning, students and teachers usually do not see one another. Lalo na pag nag-flash na tayo ng PowerPoint, diba, hindi naman nakikita yung paano ng mga bata. So, that mas mahirap po talaga yung interactions, lalo na wala din, of course, yung non-verbal cues. Frequency of interaction, gaya na sinabi ko kanina, unlike face-to-face, limited po ang online natin. So, in that, of course, marami tayong kailangan maintindihan on how we would be able, of course, to manage our class well virtually. So, with that, allow me to present to you some guidelines for effective management of an online class. Okay? So, first, you may set the tone and level of expectations. If you model well-written, concise, and properly spelled check messages, it would be easier for you to require the same from your students. Okay? So, and second, it would be helpful for your students in keeping the motivation level up if you chunk all readings into smaller paragraphs that contain one main idea. Keeping things short and simple is always a good idea. So, just like in a regular classroom, online instructors also have to monitor student interactions and behavior. So, even in an online setting, students can say and do things that are inappropriate, diba? So, kaya po mahalaga po itong mga guidelines. So, again po, balikan natin. First, set the tone of expectation. Ito na po yung nire-reiterate ko kanina pa. The students must understand ano po ba yung expected sa kanila para alam din po nila kung ano yung gagawin nila. But of course, kailangan po teachers, role models tayo. So, tandaan natin kung paano natin ginagawa ito, we have to expect na ganoon din po yung gagawin ng mga bata. Okay? Second, gaya ng sinabi ko, of course, kailangan po ang presentation ng lessons natin nakadepende po with regards to how the human brain works. And of course, we have to understand itong mga kabataan na to, of course, mahirap sa part nila yung sandamakmak na words. Gaya nito, for example, yung PowerPoint ko po ngayon, masyado word dito, di ba? So, in order for our students to be more motivated, to be more focused in their lesson, then kailangan po part ng classroom management yan. Dapat yung readings nila chunk siya into smaller paragraphs that contain, of course, one specific idea. Okay? Second, guidelines for effective management of online class. Of course, third, keep the content of your course well organized. If the students don't have to search around for things, their frustration level stays low. So, mahalaga din po yun with your teachers. Ako po, maswerte yung mga teachers na may learning management system. Kasi diba, nasa learning management system na lahat. But other teachers talagang andun pa rin, of course, yung talagang medyo challenge sa atin kasi yung iba sa Facebook magme-message, sa email magme-message. So, dapat po teachers magkaroon tayo ng specific venue. Saan natin i-upload ang materials? Bakit? Kasi it adds, of course, to the frustration of the students kapag nahihilo sila, saan mo ko ba kukunin itong material na to? So, sometimes it would result to them not being able to do the activity kasi nabisit na sila, hindi ko malaman sa ba in-upload na sir yun, saan ba nilagay na sir, nasa Google ba, nasa email ba, nasa social media ba, and then the like. Fourth, manage your discussion forums. Too many threads will make online learning frustrated. Balance between student-centered and instructor-centered activities. Same thing din po kahit yung volume ng pagbibigay natin ng dami ng gawain. We also have to balance these things. Baka mamaya too overwhelming. Well, of course, when we talk about students nowadays, kapag sobrang na-overwhelm niya, sometimes instead of doing the task, they would just resort to not doing it. Kasi napu-frustrate sila o nabibigla sila, no-overwhelm sila. So those are some things that you can, of course, apply to manage your class well. Fifth, take advantage of the technical tools available and utilize other resources. Gaya ng sinabi ko kanina, may teachers, technology is our best friend, technology is our best buddy. So there are a lot of applications that you can use online in helping the students learn and understand their lessons, acquire the skills, develop, of course, the knowledge, and then the like. Gaya, for example, ng Kahoot, ng Mentimeter, of course, ZipGrade, Padlet, and then the like. 6, be explicit and emphatic about the time requirement in the syllabus. Teachers usually spell out their rules regarding assignment, due dates, and participation in the syllabus. Let us also be, considerate. Hindi po pasok po yung sinabi ko kanina ng C compassion. Whenever we set, for example, let us make it realistic. For example, kunwari po, we're requiring them to watch a video. Hindi po ibig sabihin binigay natin yung video ngayon, bukas pwede na natin asahan na expect na napanood na nila. We have to be realistic. Not all of them have access to internet. And of course, we have to be realistic as well that right now, hindi lang po education nila ang priority nila. Of course, students pa yun. Lahat po tayo ngayon sa Pilipinas, sa buong mundo, ang priority natin, of course, would have to be our safety. So, of course, dahil po doon, we have to understand that we have to set more realistic deadlines. Okay? So, these are some of the guidelines, some of the tips that I'd like to present po to you in order, of course, for us to be able to have, to manage our classes more effectively. Okay? But right now, allow me to talk about one specific concept na talagang kailangan natin ma-observe. Online tone. Di ba kanina po, sabi ko kanina, napakahirap yung part na nagbago, of course, yung communication natin. It's not face-to-face. So, with this, of course, yung online tone po ay napakahalaga. What is online tone? Okay? So, online instructors and facilitators are responsible for helping students learn the most effective ways to communicate in an online learning environment. So, it is recommended that online instructor or the facilitator should talk online as they would speak in natural way. So, huwag po natin iparamdam sa estudyante na parang, uy, iba to. They need to understand that this virtual space, that this virtual classrooms are the same with the classrooms na nasa nila in a normal setup. Hindi nila, kumbaga ako po, to be honest, I'd like to believe na, of course, we need to be formal, especially for recording videos. Pero when we talk about discussing, dapat fun, dapat maramdaman ng bata na pwede magkamali. Baka sa mamaya isipin ng bata, bawal magkamali, bawal ako magsalita. Bawal magkamali, so safe ng behavior ko. Bawal magkamali, there's no freedom of expression. Dapat hindi gano'n. Dapat maramdaman ng bata na it's a learning space for them. So if they commit errors, of course, they need to be corrected, they need to be taught the right way. But they need to feel na it's not, kumbaga, it's a place for them to learn. Kaya positive po talaga yung approach. And of course, one of the many ways to do it, of course, yung tinatawag nating online to. Second, no physical presence. Totoo po yan, wala talagang physical presence. So dahil wala pong physical presence si teachers, walang emotions. Diba yung emoji? Hindi naman pwedeng, for example, lahat ng tinatype natin may smiley, may angry face, may sad face, and then the like. So of course, yung emotional tone natin, of course, lahat po yan, marireflect din yan with regards to how we talk to them. Okay? And of course, when we talk about online learning, managing classrooms online, hindi po pwedeng mawala. Ito yung nakita ko doon sa metimeter natin, yung salitang netiquette. Okay? Netiquette. Alright. So, netiquette refers to the combination of internet and network etiquette. So, talk about etiquette, it's knowing what is right and of course what is wrong in an online environment. So, there's our recommended guidelines for personal conduct that apply to all online communications. So, right now that we're opening classes, I hope all the schools, with the help of the administrators and the teachers, are already done designing your own etiquette, your own rules and regulations, of course, in online learning. For example, kunwari po, yun nga, no screenshots, no recording of videos, that is permitted by the teacher. Yung mga ganun po, dapat meron po tayo doon. Okay? So, but right now, allow me to give you some of my recommendations. So, ito yung mga generic recommendations that we can use, of course, in constructing our own rules and regulations for an online class. One, of course, be polite and be respectful. Remember, it can be tempting to let her go in an environment that feels anonymous, but remember that there are also real people reading your messages. Di ba po, for example, minsan pag mga bata nag-chat talaga, minsan medyo magugulat ka lang sa mga salita nila, di ba? So, the students must understand, of course, that there are other teachers, there are, of course, a teacher, there are the classmates also are also in the virtual classroom. So, dapat, lahat po ng tinatype nila, of course, would always be polite and would always be showing respect to others. Okay? So, for example, baka mamaya may sasagot sila, tapos mamaya medyo offensive pala, medyo bullying na siya. So, the student must understand, of course, the behavior nila, of course, they would need to be sensitive. Okay? Second, be tolerant of views expressed by others. Your online classroom may be bringing together with people from all over the world. Keep in mind that you probably have something to gain from exposure to views and background different than your own. So, guys, alam naman natin ito lahat, di ba? We have to be open-minded. So, of course, and culturally sensitive as well. So, there are opinions that would vary, of course, that would be different from our opinion. But at the same time, dapat natin tandaan, of course, it's part of learning. Diba? So, dapat po, alam natin, of course, how to be tolerant with regards to specific views. Okay? Next, Address the idea and not the person. Kapag mali, we do not conclude na mali yung tao. We conclude na mali yung idea, mali yung sagot, pero hindi mali yung tao. So when reacting to someone else's message, address the ideas and not the person. Di ba? Pag nag-away nga, di ba? I'm trying to correct your answer. But not, of course, I'm not saying na ikaw yung mali. Ang sinasabi ko, mali yung sagot mo. Okay? Next, of course, be careful when using sarcasm and humor. Gaya po kanina, binanggit ko pa, di ba, sarcasm is something that we must also avoid in order for us to promote positive discipline. Okay? So without face-to-face communication, people may take your humor personally. Kasi nga po, wala yung emotional impact, wala yung emotional contact. Diba? So keep in mind that online forms of communication are absent of any emotion. So napakahalaga po by the teachers that we have to be sensitive. Kumbaga dapat we have to think and process kung ano yung sasabihin natin bago natin sabihin. Kasi baka mamaya, hindi natin napapansin, we're already offending them. Okay, next, do not spam your classmates. Diba, spamming, of course, when you or instructor or classmates receive numerous unwanted messages. Kunwari tayo teachers, diba? Pag tayo teachers, minessage ng estudyante, hindi nag-reply, tinatantay, nakakairita. Diba? Ganun din po. Dapat maintindihan ng mga bata na ganun din yung policies. Mamaya may group activity. Hindi nila kailangan tagtarin ng messages sa mga klase nila. They need also to be patient enough, of course, to wait for their classmates to respond because it's an act of respecting. Okay? Act of respect. Next, of course, think carefully about what you write. Always assume that your electronic messages would be forwarded. Okay? So again, bago natin i-type, bago natin sabihin, kailangan po pag-isipan natin. So isipin natin, ako po in an online setup, like ko isip, hindi ilang estudyante ang kaharap ko. Kaharap ko din yung mga magulang ng mga estudyante ko. Kasi syempre, ang mga magulang, iba na nasa bahay lang, work from home. So of course, they would also want to have a bond, of course, with their kids. And one of the many ways to do it, of course, is attending classes together with the kids. So, hindi po natin na mamaya, ang katabi pala ng estudyante natin, mga magulang nila, tapos yung words natin medyo hindi ganun kaganda. So, we have to, of course, to understand those things as well. Alright? So, but of course, when we talk about discipline, gaya ng sinasabi ko kanina, di ba, netiquette, lahat po yan, we formulate all these things because of one thing. Because of misbehavior. Bakit tayo nagkakaroon ng rules and regulations? Because of course of misbehavior. In fact, many teachers complain, di ba, na sabi nila, one of the toughest parts of my job, of course, is handling misbehavior. 53% of teachers are stressed because of students' misbehavior. So again, pag ano po ba yung misbehavior, let us try to briefly discuss. A misbehavior refers to a threatening action of an individual student that interferes with teaching, violates the right of other students to learn, creates an unsafe situation, destroys property, causes harm to others, or disrupt the flow of academic activities. So in other words, anything, of course, that disrupt our classes para maging smooth sailing siya, that is considered misbehavior. So allow me, of course, to discuss with you ano po ba yung common causes nun? Kasi di ba, we wouldn't be able, of course, to avoid these things not unless we know the very roots of these actions. So what are the common causes of misbehavior? Okay? One, of course, health conditions. Di ba? Dapat intindihin po natin yan. There's some students that we have to understand na hindi lang na ito pong COVID sa kanila, pwedeng for example, it would lead them to depression, it would lead them to kumbaga emotional needs nila, mental health po nila. So dapat aware po tayo na these things are also reasons why they actually misbehave. Second, of course, physical impairment, neurological factors, familiar factors, gang-related activities, classroom factors, lack of support, and the like. So in other words po, madaming factors for misbehaviors, okay? So, and in order for us to fully understand, okay, why our students are misbehaving, kailangan po talaga natin i-track yun. So how? Of course, by talking to them. Okay? So pwede po natin, for example, kausapin, nakita natin yung bata, hindi talaga nagpapasa. Nakatatlong sessions na, walang in-attend. We talk to the kids. Doon pala natin malalaman, ay may family problem pala, nag-undergo pala sa ganitong problema, and then the like. So, we have to understand, not, of course, gaya na sinabi ko kanina, our students have various needs also that they also need to address aside from their educational needs. So, common factors that influence student behavior. Ano po ba yun? One, curriculum. Ito po yung dahilan bakit ang DepEd nag-adapt ng MELCs or Most Essential Learning Competencies. Why? Because they understand that in an online learning setup, kapag pinilit natin isaksak lahat ng learning competencies, may hirapan ng bata, it would result to misbehavior. Kaya mas pinasimple po ng DepEd. Second, Effectiveness of the teacher. Tayo po ba effective? And how to be effective? It is, of course, having the right attitude, knowing how to embrace the many changes in the field of education. Methods of disciplining them. Baka mamaya, we're not disciplining them. We're after, of course, punishing them. Learning environment. Gaya ng sinabi ko kanina, we have to promote positive learning environment because this is where they would feel na, ay, ito yung tamang lugar sa akin. So, dito, gagawin ko kung ano yung part ko. And of course, yung part ko, gawin yung responsibility ko as a student. Management skills of the teacher, attitude of the teacher. Baka mamaya si teacher, for example, konting kibot lang, konting ingay lang ng online class, galit na, di ba? So, of course, mahalaga din po yun, of course, in terms of managing our classes effectively. Administrators, why? Of course, as teachers, we follow kung ano po yung ini-implement na system ng administrator. And of course, part sila nun. And of course, we talk about the school staff, the school routine, the adequacy of the facilities. Siyempre, for example, kunwari, wala tayong sariling learning management system, then syempre medyo mas i-foresee natin na mas mahirap i-maintain yung classes natin. But of course, if we will be able to provide them a learning environment, facilities talaga na talagang qualified for online learning, then of course, we have to expect that their student behaviors would have to be prevented. But aside from that, ano pa po ba yung mga ways para ma-prevent po natin ito? Okay? One, preventing all misbehaviors in the classrooms. Honestly speaking, imposible po yan. Why? Kasi minsan ang problema po, hindi naman nasa loob ng klase, kundi nasa labas ng klase. And of course, we teachers, even if we are modern heroes, hindi naman natin kaya solusyonan lahat ng problema nila, gaya ng internet connection, gaya ng familiar problems, and then the like. So with this, we teachers must anticipate misbehavior anytime. And of course, and since we anticipate na possible na mag-exist to, then we have to prepare ourselves in terms of dealing with these things. Okay? However, sometimes misbehavior, of course, this is directly connected to the teaching modalities used in delivering instructions. So in other words, titingnan din natin. Baka, it is true, totoo yung sinabi ko po kanina, na karamihan dyan, dahilan dyan, hindi naman sa loob ng klase. Pero it is also true that sometimes, the main reasons of these misbehaviors, of course, galing po yan doon sa mismo nangyayari sa klase natin. Alright, so now, I think if I'm not mistaken, this is the last part of my presentation. So, allow me to give some tips po kung paano natin mas ma-manage pa yung online learning, di ba? So, kasi sabi natin kanina, sometimes misbehavior is directly connected to how we deliver instruction online. So with that, paano po ba natin dapat i-manage yung klase natin? Di ba? Para ma-avoid natin, of course, itong misbehaviors na to. One, build an engaging online environment. Sabi din sa Edutopia in 2017, we have to create virtual spaces in their blended classroom that serve different purposes. Second, of course, we have to build community. Find ways for your participants to learn about one another, to learn about you, and to find commonalities in their experiences. Ito yung sinasabi ko kanina, dapat may rapport, may connection. Di ba, ang hirap makipag-usap sa isang estudyante na hindi mo talaga kilala. Ganun din po sa part nila. Kailangan mas makilala nila tayo. So sa umpisa po, of course, ng online learning, we have to take time. We have to, marami namang online games, maraming online activities that you can of course use, online applications that you can use para to break the ice. Kumbaga para at least mas maging komportable kayo sa isa't isa. Kaya mahalaga po yun. Next, create answers in an organized way. Find ways to create resources and responses to them so that participants can find them easily. Gaya nung sinabi ko kanina, everything must be organized. Mahirap po yung may Facebook, may email, may LMS, tapos kung ano-ano pa pong ways na pwede natin na pwedeng mag-interact with them. Next, be present. Don't leave the learning for the students to do independently without your help. Alam niyo po, my dear teachers, last semester, we, of course, UST, we had our emergency remote learning. So, nagtuloy-tuloy po kami. Hindi po kami nag-stop. Nagtuloy-tuloy po kami ng third quarter and fourth quarter for high school, for second semester for college online. So, one of the things po na nakita ko doon, mahalaga po sa mga estudyante that the teachers are there for them, for their own learning. Hindi lang po sa pamamagitan ng pagsasend ng PowerPoint or pagsasend ng video. So in other words, my dear teachers, our job will not just end by recording videos, sending it to the students. Dapat po andun palagi yung discourse, andun palagi yung pag-uusap nyo para of course they would feel na pwede ka nilang kausapin kapag may clarification, things that they don't understand, of course, if they want guidance, and then like, you have to be present in the educational journey of your students, okay? Next, of course, establish norms for office hours and video conferencing. So you create rules and regulations for your online classes. Mahalagang mahalaga po ito. Teachers, lalo na po sa oras. Kasi ako po, naniniwala naman ako na siyempre, as part of our job, dapat ma-address natin yung needs ng mga estudyante natin at all times. Pero alam niyo po, marami kasi dyan, minsan for example, gabi na magme-message and then na like, ako minsan sasagutin ko po. Pero the students and the parents must understand na dapat talaga may specific hours para at least tayo teachers, may personal life din po tayo, di ba? Na ina-address din po. So dapat alam din nila yon na may oras po for this video conferencing na ganitong oras. If they have concerns, dapat natatapos na ng 5 p.m. mabigay nila para at least tayo, we can also address the different needs that we have, of course, after our classes. Okay? So yung norms po na yun, yung rules and regulations na yun, mahalaga po yun. Don't group randomly. Ito po, in having group activities, di ba, dati ginagawa natin, B1, B2, B3, B4, okay, magkakasama. This time, we have to be more sensitive. We have to be more creative in grouping them. Kasi of course, sabi ko nga po, ang communication nito online. So baka mamaya, we're grouping people na hindi talaga compatible. Mas mahirap po yun. Okay, so of course, right now that this is the first time that we're implementing full online, we also try our best to make things simpler for our students and easier for them. And one of which, of course, is making, kumbaga, more strategic ways of grouping them. Okay? Next, of course, teach students about plagiarism. Okay? We cannot say, oy, nagagalit ako sa'yo, cheating ka. If we do not teach, of course, what is plagiarism to the students, mahalaga pong malaman nila yon. So be proactive and teach what plagiarism is and of course, how to avoid them. Hindi yung tipong nagagalit tayo na nag-plagiarize sila, hindi naman pala natin tinuro kung ano yung plagiarism. Okay? So next, of course, don't shy away from difficult conversations. May mga teachers po kasi nagsasabi na parang, alam nyo, hindi kita pwede makausap ng ganyan kasi ang hirap ng online. Pero teachers, we have to understand na wala namang, di naman sinabi ng DepEd na matatapos to in a month, in 2 months, 3 months or so. So in other words, wag po nating takasan yung difficult conversations, okay? Stay on top of issues as they arise. Next, use various means to contact participants. Contact small groups of students and also whole class routinely, but know when it's time to do a behind-the-scenes intervention. In other words po, my dear teachers, we actually, of course, find different ways of contacting our participants. I'd like to believe, ito, trabaho na talaga to, na naging kumbaga nature na natin to, yung mga hindi kaya mag-online, they would go modular, yung mga kaya mag-online, of course, they would, go for online. Pero kailangan din natin tandaan, my dear teachers, na yung trabaho natin, yung behind-the-scenes intervention, nandun pa din po yun. Diba? For example, gaya nung sinabi ko kanina, andun pa din po yung consultations natin. And minsan, small group lang sila, minsan big group sila, minsan nasa class, and then the like, para of course, ma-address din natin yung ba't iba pa pong pangangailangan nila. Alright, so now, of course, I'd like to formally end, of course, my webinar today, our webinar today. I'd like to show you this picture, okay? In an online learning, of course, sabi ko nga kanina, limited ang setup. Okay? Limited ang time, limited ang resources and everything. So the question is, do you have all the time in the world? The answer, of course, is a no. Okay? And since we don't have all the time in the world to do this, then we, of course, we have to manage our class effectively. And by doing this, of course, dapat natin, huwag natin kakalimutan that there are a lot of strategies that we have to kumbaga maximize an online learning setup. Marami rin pong, for example, things na hindi na dapat natin ginagawa in an online learning. So, of course, lahat po ito, masisimplify po ito, of course, by having a good lesson planning. I'd like to believe na lesson planning po, kapag maayos ang lesson plan natin, budgeted ang oras natin, then of course, this online learning, success of this one is indeed possible. Now, for my last slide po, how do students learn this? A mission critical challenge then is for schools to construct a way for all staff members to come to deeply understand and make learning principles their own. So of course, this is given by Wiggins and Naktai in 2007. Sila po 'di ba yung mga UBD proponents. So right now, of course, ganun din po dapat tayo, 'di ba? This is something new for us, right? Definitely. But sooner or later, of course, if we would be able to understand kumbaga the very concepts of online learning, then definitely we can, of course, make this learning principles as our own. So on that note, my dear teachers, this is the end of our webinar po. So thank you so much for attending our session. If you have questions po, you can email me at jcorquera@bivalgroup.com. Nilagay ko rin po dyan yung social media ko po kasi may mga nagme-message din po, some questions. I will do my best po to answer also your queries din po. If you have any, feel free po, of course, to message me. Ayun lang po. Salamat po. Sana po may natutunan po tayo today.
Thank you very much, Sir Joram. Now, we will proceed to the question and answer portion. Our first question is from Chris Kapilayan. How do you discipline students that commit cyberbullying?
Ayan, so that's a very good question. So cyberbullying. Ako, we'll talk about cyberbullying. Ganang sinabi ko kanina, cyberbullying teachers, cyberbullying students. Diba? Ako na ko pong ginagawa dyan, I process the student. I need to make the student understand ano ang ginawa mo. Hindi ko sasabihin na ito yung ginawa mo, 'di ba? I mean, the answer must be coming from the students themselves para maintindihan nila ito pala yung impact nun. And then after that, of course, syempre if they commit things against the rules and regulations of the schools, then there will always be consequences. Pero right now po kasi for me in an online learning setup, mahalaga po yung parents engagement. Mahalaga po, of course, that the parents would be involved in terms of not only helping their kids, their students, kumbaga achieve academic success, but also yung tamang behavior. So for example, may mga cases ng bullying, then we also have to talk to the parents, if we need a first, para at least alam din yung parents na, ay, sorry ma'am, sorry sir, bawal pala to, bawal pala yan, and then the like, para at least alam din po, of course, ng mga parents, kasi sila yung kasama ng mga bata, of course, sila yung mas makapag-process. But then again, of course, if the cyberbullying exists talaga na talagang matindi na, yung disciplinary action nito, of course, dapat din, binibigay na po natin sa guidance office. Because, of course, minsan, itong cyberbullying, gaya ng sinabi ko kanina, may reasons din to. Baka mamaya, nagsa-cyberbully pala kasi may problema rin siya. So, of course, itong mga problema na to, mapaprocess din ito, of course, by talking to the students, and of course, kumbaga, making consultations sa guidance counselors po natin. Ayun.
Thank you for that, sir. Next question from Mira Dominguez. Sir, how can we encourage our learners to be engaged in our online class?
Alam niyo po, to be honest, that's the biggest challenge. Ako, sabi ko nga nung ginagawa ko tong webinar today, sabi ko, feeling ko hindi naman magiging issue maingay sila habang nag-online class kasi mag-off mic naman yung karamihan sa mga yan, di ba? Saka pwede naman natin i-off mic sila pag maingay sila. Pero sabi ko, we'll talk about managing our classes. We'll talk about learning, teaching them how to be disciplined. It's not a matter of knowing when to talk and when not to talk, but is knowing what is the right thing to do and what is not, of course. And one of which, of course, yung compliance nila, yung talagang engagement nila sa learning. Ako po, simple lang po ang sagot ko dyan sa tanong na yan. If we would be able to make learning interesting for our students by addressing their needs, their wants, their preferences, bakit naman po sila ayaw? But if we're going to force what we want, di ba? Despite the fact that these things might be different from what they want, then it would really be hard for us to make them more engaged with regards to the lessons. So I think the secret here to elicit compliance for the students, they must understand that you're doing it for them, and that they must understand that you're also making your best effort, of course, to make things better for them. Ayun po.
Thank you, sir. And for our last question from Timothy Guevara, paano po kung may magulang na biglang mag-medal sa kalagitnaan ng online class at merong complaint?
Ayan. Ako po, I always believe na dapat po talaga, siyempre, sabi po kanina, netiquette, di ba? So I'm pretty sure right now po, all the schools, nag-come up na tayo ng sarili nating online rules and regulations. And siyempre, if the parents would know and would understand that these things are something that they must avoid, di ba? Siyempre, ipe-present naman natin yan. Magkakaroon tayong parents orientation, magkakaroon tayong students orientation. If the parents would understand that these things are prohibited, that these things, of course, are not allowed. Kasi nga, ilalagay natin din na if you have concerns, for example, you can email this, you can set a virtual appointment to this and that, then the parent, of course, would not be doing this. Pero ako, of course, kung talagang, for example, may ganyan, then of course, you have to talk to the parent that this thing should be done at a right time and sa tamang venue din. And unfortunately, that moment, hindi talaga yun yung tamang venue for that thing. Ayun po. So again, it all boils down to how organized you are, hindi lang sa pagplano ng lesson mo, kundi sa pagplano, of course, ng entire academic year nyo. So yung school policies, yung netiquette nyo po online, the do's and the don'ts, of course, mahalagang mahalaga po yan para, of course, magkabap tayo sa isang maayos na academic year.
Thank you for that, sir. That's all the questions we have for now. Any last reminders to our viewers for today, sir?
Ayan, last reminder po, siguro, again, online learning is not easy. Hindi po siya madali. Lalo na, of course, for those who are not really experts or for those who are not really good in terms of using technology. But then ako, I like to believe na kung meron tayong teaching isang bagay na talagang walang iba, yun yung pagmamahal natin sa ginagawa natin. Yun yung pagmamahal natin sa profession natin. So indeed, our love for teaching, of course, kumbaga, is indeed more significant. Kumbaga, and definitely, it's more than enough for us to be able, of course, to fulfill our mission as educators. Ayun lang po. Maraming salamat po for watching, of course, our webinar today. I hope you were able, of course, to learn new things, new insights po that you can apply in managing online environments more effectively. Thank you po for watching.
There we have it. On behalf of the Val Group Incorporated, I would like to thank our speaker for today for this very insightful learning session. It is an honor to have you with us today, sir. And to all our Kavival viewers, all thanks to you for your continuous patronage to our daily learning session. Muli,